come here and talk to you a little bit about the FDA perspectives on FSMA and where we seem to be moving. So I really want to thank Rick and his staff for allowing us today. Okay, we're going to switch gears just a little bit. We talked about some of the framework behind FSMA and the responsibilities for imports and surveillance and so forth. What I want to do in the next couple of minutes is two things. One, tell you a little bit about the underlying science that we're going to use from our research and laboratory perspectives to support FSMA, and also to entice you, because I'm not going to get through some of the slides that I wanted to show you about some of our surveillance programs, to come back at 1 o'clock for the Ask the Experts to talk a little bit more about the underlying science components and how we are going to develop a new surveillance paradigm. So that's what I'm going to try to do in the next couple of minutes. Okay, from my perspective, and Roberta already pointed this out, as we move forward under FSMA, we are trying to change the paradigm to develop a more risk-informed, preventative and focused program. We don't want to be reactive anymore. We don't want to wait for the time that there is going to be an outbreak to try to decide how we're going to move forward. We also want to make sure that, as Roberta pointed out, our responsibilities are large. The number of commodities that we have to have responsibility over is large. And there has to come a time when we do a risk-informed ranking of how we approach this. Does this mean that we're going to ignore some of the things that we deem not nearly as risky for our nation and our food supply? The answer is no. But the idea is, where do we need to put most of our resources first and reapportion those and go forward? From my perspective and from the laboratory's perspective, science is the underlying foundation for many of these 10 elements here listed for how the food safety program is going to work. It helps support surveillance and response. It helps support surveillance and response for imports. It also helps to support inspections, compliance, standard setting, food defense naturally, animal food and feed. These types of things all have an underlying science component to them. One of the FDA's biggest stakeholders is the field labs, which actually does the inspections, which actually does the analytical work that helps support and provide the safety assurances that we're looking for in our foods. And naturally, as we go through some of the three main sections in FSMA, we can identify certain sections within those that actually have a big science component to them, where we look at building domestic capacity in the general foods provision, the National Agricultural and Food Defense Strategy section, which talks about how the FDA needs to form interagency partnerships, working with our counterparts at the USDA, working with some of our food safety counterparts at the CDC. It also looks, and we can skip down to section 3, how we are going to build capacity with our foreign stakeholders and our other foreign governments in making sure that we have the food safety assurances that we need both in our imports and in our exports. And then in the middle section, detection and surveillance. What do we need to ensure that our capacity to do surveillance is above reproach? Working both with the integrated consortium of laboratory networks, of which the Food Emergency Response Network is part of that, and also how we conduct our surveillance and what we need to support our surveillance activities. What I wanted to do was focus on 3 of these 6 concepts with lab capacity and FSMA, touching very briefly on partnerships and capacity and technology and innovation. What I'm going to do is just say one or two sentences about each of those and move on. Hopefully it will spur a little interest that we can talk about this later on. But naturally what I'd like to move on to is how we are adapting our surveillance and the science that underlies this new science shift, new surveillance shift. Our capacity for partnerships needs to grow, and we have started to do this at the same time that FSMA was being instituted, working with all our research components within FDA itself, because we are both a food and feed organization. So naturally, the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, which has 5 different research offices, the Center for Veterinary Medicine, which has an Office of Research, which is at Mod 1 in Laurel, and then our field laboratories, of which there are 13 spread around the country. We are desperately trying to ensure that the communication between those laboratory research entities is as good as it can possibly be, especially in coordinating our efforts into making sure that we use the resources that we have at hand without wasting them. At the same time, working with our USDA and CDC partnerships, and to some extent, some of our colleagues at the EPA and at the National Institutes of Health. And lastly, we have stakeholders outside of the government, in academia, and across our borders. To this extent, we are trying to develop these partnerships and also realizing that we can't do it all. And sometimes, even within the government, we become a little bit myopic. We do not see the forest for the trees at times. And so what we're trying to do is look at our knowledge gaps, our gaps in our scientific and our laboratory capabilities, seeing what is missing, what we can do, what we can't do, and how can we reach out to others who may have a different idea. The concept is very similar to being very DARPA-esque, where we're putting out a challenge to identify a need and seeing what types of ideas we can get back. I don't know how many people have noticed, but the FDA's Foods Program just recently closed the open submission period for an innovation challenge. And the challenge is something very simple as this. We are looking for ways to increase our analytical time, or I should say decrease our analytical time in analyzing fresh produce for salmonella. Ordinarily, it may take from 3, 5 to 7 days to get a confirmation. A lot of that time has to do with resuscitation and enriching. How can we decrease that time to get an answer? And we can talk about that a little bit more. So, what does all this science really do? Why do we conduct the types of research in our laboratories? And the bottom line is that we need to support surveillance. And we do this through risk-based targeting, emerging issues, what is happening in real time. Oops. Going a little bit faster than I want. We want to make sure that we have the capabilities to support the verification processes under FSMA, and then also our compliance strategy.